I disagree, actually. Funnily enough, Warren and I both talked about this. He's been on the campaign trail, so he's had probably more immediate interaction. But whenever I presented this idea, and I presented it at a number of conferences, a lot of speeches, I presented it once when I was in a debate with the former governor of the Bank of Canada. And actually, it got a surprising degree of what I would call bipartisan support. I think, as Randy said, a lot of people on the right like the idea that you can legitimize government expenditure via work, and actually, especially when you sell them on the idea that it's not that we want to eliminate welfare, but if you say that it makes welfare redundant because you have this program in place, but it does actually tend to command a lot more appeal. Funnily enough, a lot of times I get I've had objections from the unions rather than on the right, because the unions think that what you're trying to do is create a slave class of laborers that's going to undercut their wages, and you try to explain that you're trying to fill the gap and then create a full employment pool which ultimately enhances their pricing power. So in the first, I think that this is one of our winning ideas, which actually could get a much greater political acceptance than you think.
Every monetary system uses a buffer stock policy. A gold standard is a gold buffer stock. Unemployment is an unemployed buffer stock. What we're saying is an employed buffer stock is far superior to an unemployed buffer stock and far superior to a gold buffer stock. It's larger, deeper, more flexible, and most important, whatever your buffer stock is always fully employed. There's always a bid for the buffer stock. On a gold standard, gold is always fully employed. You can always take an ounce of gold and sell it to the government and get money. You can always monetize it. In a wool buffer stock, where Bill started, there's always a bid for wool. Okay, sheep were fully employed. And so, no, it's true. So right now, we use unemployment as a buffer stock. This is clearly shows we don't have any idea what we're doing. Not only do we not understand the monetary system, we don't understand that, well, it's part of it. We don't understand a buffer stock always anchors a monetary system. So we should be using an employed buffer stock.
I wanted to correct a misunderstanding, because a lot of people do jump to this, that we're going to guarantee that a job offer for anyone who's ready and willing to work. And then they say, oh, so they'll never get fired. No, we never said that. They don't show up, they show up drunk, they don't do their work, they're fired. Okay? Anything that a private employer can do legally do to their employees, the employers in this program will do. Okay? And just socialism, I think if you tell most Americans what we're going to do is we're going to require that people who ought to be working, okay, define disabilities, I think very narrowly, they're going to have to work instead of welfare. And you ask them, what would you call that system? All Americans are going to call that, oh, that's capitalism. They wouldn't call it socialism.
Didn't they already say we converted from welfare to workfare? I don't know exactly what that meant, but wasn't that Clinton's big thing?
Well, but without the jobs.
At a minimum, you have to sell your time, and that has value. And look, so we're not talking about the government owning the means of production. We're talking about the government providing for public infrastructure. And public infrastructure is all the things you hire people for, and then you've got this transition pool where you facilitate the transition from back to the private sector, and that's what this does. We're 750,000 in Argentina. I think out of the 2 million in Argentina, 750,000 went to private sector employment within 2 years. People who never would have done this before. Was it more than that? More like half. Okay, that's enormous. These are people who had never been in a private sector, never held a private sector job. The biggest service this did to the economy, well, one was all the direct things, but secondarily, it allowed the economy to expand at very high rates without labor bottlenecks. Okay, so it's an extreme facilitation of private sector, where right now private labor does not flow from unemployment to private sector very well at all. It takes a lot of demand pull to get that done, which is to everyone's disadvantage, to the detriment of all of us.
But the point about the business is that I often give talks to business community, and they're as right-wing in Australia as they are here. And I've given talks in the Netherlands, they're as right-wing as they are in South Africa and elsewhere. And what I say to them, and it's Warren's point, I ask them the question, they're all in suits and what have you, and I say, well, where are the unemployed now? And it's a question they've never really asked, I don't think. And eventually I get them to admit or understand that the unemployed are already in the public sector. Now, you're having debates in Congress somewhere down there or up there, I'm not sure of the direction, about extending unemployment benefits. Well, that's a recognition, and you'll obviously do that again, given the scale of the crisis, I would imagine. But in Australia, we have unemployment benefits guaranteed. But that tells you where the unemployed are. They're in the public sector. So then I say to the assembled businessmen, typically men, I say, well, what are they doing in the public sector? And I can get them to chant nothing. And then I say, well, are you happy about that? And I can get them to say, no, the bastards. And I say, wouldn't you rather them doing something productive in the public sector? And they say yes. And once you go through this logic, you can sneak up on them. And in the end, they become supporters of the job guarantee, doing community-based development work, doing environmental care services, doing aged care services. Because they would rather, their ideology and their prejudices would rather see them doing something than nothing. It's very easy to persuade that.
I would like to echo what Marshall was talking about. It kind of surprised me and woke me up. I have right-wing friends, I'm sure you do too. But there's one thing that does echo with them. Put them to work and they'll pay taxes. And believe me, they agree with me on nothing else. And they think it's a good idea. Believe it or not.
People say to me, well, what happens if someone liked working in the job guarantee? And I said, well, what's wrong with liking your job? Sounds to me like a good thing if you actually settled in the job guarantee for life and made it a career move. What's wrong with that? Most people won't do that, but some people might. And then it's up to the private sector to restructure their jobs and their wages and conditions offered to make themselves competitive. What's wrong with that? That's going to increase productivity.